The purpose of mortal families is to bring children into the world, to teach them what is right, and to prepare all family members for exaltation in eternal family relationships. The slogan or soundbite, pro-choice, has had an almost magical effect in justifying abortion and in neutralizing opposition to it.
It's very prophetic. He warns us of everything that we have just seen happen in the last month. He warns LDS women against these ideologies.
If we say we are anti-abortion in our personal life but pro-choice in public policy, we are saying that we will not use our influence to establish public policies that encourage righteous choices on matters God's servants have defined as serious sins.
And the biggest thing he's saying is, if you're only going to go surface level and sign up for slogans like pro-choice and my body, you might be signing up for devious, evil things that you would never actually sign up for. And what I have seen is that this ideology of being pro-choice is kind of an exit ramp for so many women in our religion and in our church to lose their faith in the gospel. Hi, you guys. Welcome to my channel. My name is Rachel. This is a channel for faithful LDS men, young women, to answer President Russell M. Nelson's call to study all we can about priesthood power. It has been such an interesting week. I have been thinking so much about, if you've seen my other videos, I've been thinking so much on this channel, like, what is a defining feature of men and women with priesthood power in their lives, men and women who take priesthood stewardship very seriously. In one of my previous videos, I really felt compelled to say that I think that men and women of the Abrahamic covenant are people in these last days who take fertility and take having children seriously. 4 years ago, it's still my most popular video, and this is my t-shirt. I am going to make these t-shirts where I kind of make a distinction. I'm not a feminist, I'm a familyist, meaning one of my other videos that I did talks about how early feminist theory talks about the explicit objective of Karl Marx and Engels is the abolition of the family. And so I want to be opposing that. I want to be pro-family. Anyway, so to this day, my most popular video, we are up to 75,000 views, which I made 3 years ago, is a talk by Elder Oaks. This talk was not available in video form when I found it. And he warns about a lot of things. He warns about trusting slogans that he basically talks about what it was like to be a member of the legal community, watching the way that the pro-choice, pro-abortion movement kind of rebranded themselves and the way that they changed their arguments.
Over 30 years ago, as a young law professor, I published one of the earliest articles on the legal consequences of abortion. Since that time, I have been a knowledgeable observer of the national debate and the unfortunate Supreme Court decisions on the so-called right to abortion. I've been fascinated with how cleverly those who sought and now defend legalized abortion on demand have moved the issue away from a debate on the moral, ethical, and medical pros and cons of legal restrictions on abortion, and have focused the debate on the slogan or issue of choice.
And then he shifts hat and makes a lot of apostolic warnings about trusting this movement and trusting these ideologies, and how women and men might be signing up for things that they would never fully sign up for.
Similarly, some reach the pro-choice position by saying we should not legislate morality. Those who take this position should realize that the law of crimes legislates nothing but morality. Should we repeal all laws with a moral base so that our government will not punish any choices some persons consider immoral? Such an action would wipe out virtually all of the laws against crimes.
What I have seen is that this ideology of being pro-choice is kind of an exit ramp for so many women in our religion and in our church to lose their faith in the gospel. And it starts out very slowly. And then it starts with my body, my choice. And then it goes to, I have agency, therefore I can make this choice. The slippery slope with this whole argument of pro-choice is that it leads women in a direction where they say, my body, my choice. We believe in agency, so I can make any choice I want, justification. Then it's my body, my choice, meaning I have autonomy over my body. No one can tell me what to do. And then it directly goes to a kind of anti-male narrative, which always leads them to have a faith crisis about the brethren, about the prophets and apostles being men, as opposed to just divine stewards who speak for God. I have seen this cycle. I have seen this sad cycle play out so many times in our religion, that the second that I see someone start saying, oh, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice, I'm like, oh, she's signing up for ideologies she does not fully appreciate. And that's one of the reasons why I made this video, is because I felt like, don't take my word for it, an apostle called this out. And he goes in to discuss that agency isn't just a free pass. Like, agency is here to make righteous choices.
Because choice is a method, choices can be exercised either way on any matter. Therefore, those who consider freedom of choice as a goal can easily slip into the position of trying to justify any choice that is made. Choice can even become a slogan to justify one particular choice. For example, in the 1990s, one who says, I am pro-choice, is clearly understood as opposing any legal restrictions upon a woman's choice to abort a fetus at any point in her pregnancy.
But I hear a lot of LDS women saying, well, we have agency. He goes in to say that that is not what we believe. We believe we have been given agency, and our task is to make righteous choices. And if we don't make righteous choices, we will be judged for those choices.
Using arguments of choice to try to justify altering the consequences of choice is a classic case of omitting what the Savior called the weightier matters of the law. I urge Latter-day Saints who have taken that position to ask themselves which other grievous sins should be decriminalized or smiled on by the law on this theory that persons should not be hampered in their choices. Should we criminalize or lighten the legal consequences of child abuse, of cruelty to animals, of pollution, of fraud, of fathers who choose to abandon their families for greater freedom or convenience?
And this was actually given, I love the BYU speeches, because sometimes apostles and prophets will speak about things in a more direct way than they would over general conference. And it's a great talk, and you can watch the actual video. I learned a lot about the way that Elder Oaks speaks by editing this. I didn't take anything out of context, but the way that he speaks is very legalistic, meaning he will be going to make a point A, and then he will address all the caveats to point A. And then he'll come back to the original point he's making and keep going, and then he'll address all the caveats to point B. So he has it's a linear style of speaking, but there's just so many like parentheses that feel like he's going off in random directions. And there's a lot of other, he doesn't just talk about the pro-choice movement / pro-abortion movement. So he's been warning about this since the 1990s. And I think this is prophetic. I think he is speaking in a prophetic way based on his professional observations. And I think it's worth a read. It's worth diving into. I think it's also worth more and more. I have been so pleased how many women have come up to me at conferences and like thanking me for making these videos and for speaking out for pro-life voices in the LDS community. I had several women in Texas watch one of my other videos on being pro-life and supporting life. And Neil L. Anderson in his talk last year said that we have an obligation to defend the lives of the unborn, to speak for the lives of the unborn. Like, you know, we believe in the plan of salvation. And so I know that not everyone's brave to talk about this topic, and it's definitely not, in vogue to be a woman who's pro-life. And what I say is they take away your girl card or they take away your woman card. Like, oh, you're not a real woman unless you're pro-choice. That's how they treat you when you're a woman who talks about protecting like life when you value having children. And I think this talk's relevant because we just decide. I said this to a friend last week who's from Texas. I said, what we saw this last month when people voted was people deciding who they were. We saw people deciding who they were and signing their name to be pro-family and pro-children, or anti-family and anti-children. And I think it caught everybody off guard how clear those distinctions were, that people that didn't have kids in the first place voted one way overwhelmingly. And that's not across the board. Obviously, that's not 100%, right? But generally speaking, parents voted for Trump. Single women who want abortions voted for Kamala Harris. So what I saw was there's people who care about posterity and protecting posterity, and there's people who don't. And that, to me, is a very clear signal of people who are living a covenant lifestyle and priority level and people who are not. That's why I can see very clearly that there's going to be a lot of non-LDS people who are here in the millennium, because there's so many good people in our country, Christian people who care about posterity and take protecting their posterity so seriously. It's very prophetic. He warns us of everything that we have just seen happen in the last month. He warns LDS women against these ideologies. And the biggest thing he's saying is, if you're only going to go surface level and sign up for slogans like pro-choice and my body, you might be signing up for devious, evil things that you would never actually sign up for. Okay. My title and subject today is taken from the Savior's denunciation of the scribes and Pharisees. Ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye have done, and not leave the other undone. So the title of the talk is the weightier matters of the law. And he says, the weightier matters that move us towards our goals of eternal life are love of God, obedience to his commandments, and unity in accomplishing the work of the church. I wish to speak about some weightier matters we might overlook if we allow ourselves to focus exclusively on lesser matters. The weightier matters to which I refer are the qualities like faith, love of God, and his work that will move us strongly towards eternal goals. In speaking of weightier matters, I seek to contrast our ultimate goals of eternity with the mortal methods or short-term objectives we use to pursue them. If we concentrate too intently on our obvious earthly methods or objectives, we can lose sight of our eternal goals, which the apostle called, quote, things not seen, unquote. If we do this, we can forget where we should be headed and in eternal terms go nowhere. Isn't that the definition of deciding that you don't want kids? Isn't that the definition of deciding that you don't want posterity? Like, that's the definition of it. And I'm not at all criticizing people who are righteous. It is incredibly frustrating to me, unjustly frustrating to me. I live in the South, the capital of irresponsible women having babies out of pregnancy. And I used to idolize them. I don't anymore because they are not responsible mothers, most of them. Not all of them, but like if you are a covenant couple and you want kids and you're struggling with infertility, I am so sorry for you. I do not judge you. I pray for you. You have a special, special place in God's heart. And in my mind, your desire puts you in the same category with me, right? I have 4 kids. You desire children and posterity, and I really believe you will see that blessing in the millennium. Your desire is something that God knows. So just know that I am not judging and including anyone with infertility struggles at all. Like it's just such an unfair frustration why, and I guess that's something we'll have to ask God, is why good people who want kids can't have them, but irresponsible people who don't even really take care of their kids very well are having tons of children. Okay, so anyway, he says, we do not improve our position in eternity just by flying farther and faster in mortality, but only by moving knowledgeably in the right direction. I feel like that applies to the accident of prioritizing your career above family, as women tend to, where we kind of accidentally run out the clock by spending our early 20s and mid 20s focusing on our career and then deciding in our late 20s, oh, I do want a family. And you realize it's a lot harder to meet someone that you can make a family with than you realized. And then it's a lot harder to get pregnant and in your late 20s and early 30s than you thought. I feel like that applies there. As the Lord told us in modern revelation, that which the Spirit testifies unto you, ye should do, in all holiness of heart, walking uprightly before me, considering the end of your salvation. Thus far I have spoken in generalities. Now I will give 3 examples. As Latter-day Saints family. All Latter-day Saints understand that having an eternal family is an eternal goal. Exaltation is a family matter. Not possible. Exaltation is a family matter. Gosh, our doctrine is amazing. Like, no wonder we're still having so many kids. And not just us, obviously. Muslims are having kids, and Amish and Mennonites are having kids. In the United States anyway. Muslims, there aren't many Muslims in the United States. They're like 1% of our population. But exaltation is a family matter, not possible outside the everlasting covenant of marriage, which makes possible the perpetuation of glorious family relationships. Glorious family relationship. Family relationships are divine. Having children is divine. But this does not mean that everything related to mortal families is an eternal goal. There are many short-term objectives associated with families, such as family togetherness, family solidarity, that are methods, not the eternal goals we pursue. For example, family solidarity to conduct an evil enterprise is obviously no virtue. Neither is family solidarity to conceal and perpetuate some evil practices like abuse. The purpose of mortal families is to bring children into the world, to teach them what is right, and to prepare all family members for exaltation in eternal relationships. I wish they would talk this directly right now. The purpose of mortal families is to bring children into this world. The purpose of mortal families is to bring children into this world. That is the purpose of families. That's the purpose of families. It's not like to have a great travel buddy. It's to have posterity. It's the whole point of, once again, if you are struggling with infertility, you are like me. You have a desire for children. But there are a lot of people who don't see the purpose of family or relationships or the purpose of life having anything to do with children. And our recent election shows that. A lot of women are not interested in having children. The gospel plan contemplates the kind of family government, solidarity, and love that serve those ultimate goals. But even the love of family members is subject to the overriding first commandment, which is love of God. My next choice or agency. My next example in this message on weightier matters is the role of choice or agency. So this is where he's going to talk about how there is a real popularized interpretation, especially among women, when they say, well, we believe in agency, so we can choose to be pro-life, or we can choose to be pro-abortion because God gave us agency. They conflate the idea that agency is inherently good. Agency is money. and you are judged based on how you spend it. Money isn't necessarily good or bad, it's neutral. You're lucky to have it, but if you spend that money poorly, you are judged for it and you are held accountable for the way you spend it. If you spend that money wisely and well, it benefits you and you're judged accordingly. He mentions that here. More than 30 years ago, as a young law professor, I published one of the earliest articles on the legal consequences of abortion. Since that time, I have been a knowledgeable observer of the national debate and the unfortunate Supreme Court decisions on the so-called, quote, right to abortion. I just love this talk because it's such strong language. He is mocking the idea of a right to abortion. It's in quotes. I have been fascinated how cleverly those who sought and now defend legalized abortion on demand have moved the issue away from a debate on the moral, ethical, and medical pros and cons of legal restriction on abortion, and now focus the debate on the slogan or issue of choice. He is quite literally, directly calling out the pro-choice movement. And he says, I have seen as a legal professor the way this movement rebranded their narrative from abortion's dangerous, some pregnancies are dangerous, we need it available, to no, women have a right to have a choice. It's their body, it's their choice, this is their agency, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting how he phrases that, right? He says the slogan or soundbite, quote, pro-choice, quote, has had an almost magical effect in justifying abortion and in neutralizing opposition to it. I have seen LDS women parrot this argument back to me. And I sit there thinking, you know about the you know about premortal life. You know about the war in heaven. You know that we came here to get bodies. Like, how are you making this argument? I would hear this argument from like a Protestant who doesn't have all of our doctrine. But when an LDS woman says this to me, I'm always like, do you even know what we believe? I have so much respect for the Catholic faith. So much respect. They have less doctrinal understanding than we do, and yet they are so bold and brave. Their young people are so bold and brave about being pro-life. It's amazing. And I know where people are going. He also takes on the idea of like, it's, forcing people to not be able to kill is taking away their agency. He makes the point later, like, oh, well, maybe we should legalize abuse, dog abuse, animal abuse. Should we legalize domestic abuse? Because that's taking away people's agency. So it's kind of, you see the way his mind works.
Pro-choice slogans have been particularly seductive to Latter-day Saints because we know that moral agency, which can be described as the power of choice, is a fundamental necessity in the gospel plan.
He says pro-choice slogans have been particularly seductive to Latter-day Saints because we know moral agency, which can be described as power of choice, is a fundamental necessity in the gospel plan. All Latter-day Saints are pro-choice according to the theological definition, but being pro-choice on the need for moral agency does not end the matter for us. He's saying we are not just, you have agency, make a choice. He says choice is a method, not the goal. We are accountable for our choices, and only righteous choices move us towards our eternal goals. So this idea that, I can support abortion, I can support pro-choice, and it's my agency to use as I wish, is false doctrine. It's a false doctrine. He's saying, no, we are accountable for our choices. There's no free passes here. You're given agency, and you will be judged on how you use that agency. And if you use it to end life, that's going to be tough. And if you choose to support people, I've always thought it really interesting that in the baptismal interview questions, and it applies throughout, if they ask you if you have ever supported, encouraged, paid for, or helped someone get an abortion. And I think and if you have, you are not worthy of a temple recommend. And I think the reason that you're held accountable for that, I think a lot of people think that if they didn't get one, right, that they're fine because they never got one. But if you encouraged someone to or helped someone, you are as accountable. And the reason for that, I've thought about it, is because typically people in that kind of young women in that kind of vulnerable situation are in such a vulnerable and potentially young position of being influenced for circumstances and choices they cannot maybe fully evaluate at such a young age. I will link below in the description is it Ohio State, or it's either Ohio State or Catholic University did a study finding that women who have an abortion have a pretty high rate of PTSD symptoms on the anniversary of that abortion. Strokes, heart attacks, panic attacks, anxiety attacks, dreams, those kinds of very stress-inducing like things happen to them psychologically. It is a traumatic experience for women. And if you were someone who encouraged or facilitated that, you are not worthy to walk into the temple. You aren't. Obviously, there's I'm not talking about the rare exceptions. I know people are always going to be like, well, what about the 3%? He mentions that in here, by the way. He's like, everybody uses these rare exceptions that constitute literally less than 3% of what we're talking about. It's a great talk. He literally covers every argument that is made and he debunks it. My brothers and sisters, in today's world, we are not true to our teachings if we are merely pro-choice. We must stand up for the right choice. Those who persist in refusing to think beyond slogans and sound bites like pro-choice wander from the goals they pretend to espouse and wind up giving their support to results they might not support if those results were presented without disguise. The example that I have given to women is that if you are LDS and you support abortion, it's like being vegan and supporting factory farming. You are literally canceling out your own efforts to do good in the world by promoting something that goes against the plan of God and the perpetuation of life and the plan of salvation. All right. So he's basically saying if you support pro-choice, you wander from the goals that you pretend to espouse, meaning, oh, I care about the gospel. I care about the plan of salvation. And I believe the church is true, but I pretend to espouse that. And you end up supporting results they might not support. I've heard women say to me, I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. And I think that they truly naively meant that. I don't think that they were being cheeky. I think they actually believed what they were saying to. But even these exceptions do not justify abortion automatically. Abortion is the most serious matter, and we are counseled that it should be considered only after the persons responsible have been consulted with their bishops and received divine confirmation through prayer. I've always thought that was an interesting caveat, that this is basically a process that isn't just like, oh, are you in this category? You're good. And I mean, I don't think many people take this decision very lightly. What's interesting to me is that we don't practice this very much as Latter-day Saints at all. So women who sign up for it, and there's a lot of women who do, when I say that, I mean they've decided they're pro-choice. They're kind of doing so ideologically because it's not something they would ever do themselves or encourage their children to do it or encourage anyone else to do it. It's like they ideologically want to be pro-choice, in theory, even though in their lives they aren't. So I guess you could say that's kind of good news. If we say we are anti-abortion in our personal life, but pro-choice in public policy, we are saying that we will not use our influence to establish public policies that encourage righteous choices on matters God's servants have defined as serious sins. I urge Latter-day Saints who have taken that position to ask themselves which other grievous sins should be decriminalized or smiled on by the law, and this theory that persons should not be hampered in their choices. Should we decriminalize or lighten the legal consequences of child abuse, of cruelty to animals, of pollution, of fraud, of fathers who choose to abandon their families? Similarly, so some reach the pro-choice position by saying we should not legislate morality. Those who take this position should realize that the law of crimes legislates nothing but morality. Should we repeal all laws with a moral basis so that our government will not punish any choices some persons consider immoral? Such an action would wipe out virtually all laws. He concludes by saying, we know that the work of God cannot be done without unity and cooperative action. We also know that the children of God cannot be exalted as single individuals. Neither a man nor a woman can be exalted in the celestial kingdom unless both unite in the unselfishness of the everlasting covenant of marriage, and unless both choose to keep the commandments and honor the covenants that in that united state. It is a great talk, and I encourage you to read it more and more as this world, I one impression I keep getting is be grateful for the contrast. As this world gets more and more bipolar or bifurcated, a clarity is coming for me in what I see and what I perceive as a signature of men and women who have priesthood power in their lives. Priesthood influence in their lives are people who desire children, who defend children and who have them and seek them. Men and women who And what's interesting is what we're starting to see in our country is there's kind of a feedback mechanism, isn't there? That having children changes you and changes your priorities, and it makes you behave in a different way. People who choose not to have kids or don't have them behave in a different way. That having kids and having posterity changes the reason why you're living. And I've really seen that in my generation because as an elder millennial, my generation of young women are the first generation to really break with that tradition of being mothers. It's my generation that has the highest concentration of, for the first time ever, of childless women. And a lot of them by choice, but a lot of them just procrastinate, prioritizing career over motherhood. And so it's an interesting world that we live in, but I think that priesthood power is going to help us get through it. And I think that this is a worthwhile thing to teach our children. If you feel comfortable speaking up in Relief Society, sometimes it's not worth getting into a fight over. Definitely teach your daughters, because it's a mixed bag in young women's and Relief Society these days. They probably have 2 or 3 young women's leaders who are pro-choice, who don't understand the implications of this ideology on someone's testimony. So anyway, I really encourage you to read this talk. It's so worthwhile. And you can also go onto my YouTube channel, and it's this talk, Dallin H. Oaks. Let's see, it's popular. It's under, just hit the popular button, women. It's actually women and priesthood, but Dallin H. Oaks, it's got 74,000 views, and it's the most popular video, but it's just a edited kind of compilation with visuals of what I have perceived as the impact of this movement over the course of the last 30 years and how it's evolved, and what he speaks about as being these dramatic changes that he's seen in this movement, and the way it's affecting members of our church and women losing their testimonies of the prophets because, my body, my choice, and no man can tell me what to do. So men in priesthood positions also, it's just a slippery slope, man. Anyway, thank you for being here. I so appreciate how kind you guys are to me, how much support you give to me. It is very exciting for me to speak about these controversial issues and have so many people like not celebrating, but saying, thank you for talking about this. I so agree. This is how I feel, but I understand in your private life, in your ward, you might not feel like it's a topic you want to bring up because who wants to get into a fight at church, right? Like, I get it. But it is so nice to have a corner of the internet where we as men and women in the priesthood can talk openly about this specific topic, which prophets have talked about. And there are more women than you would think in the church who feel the way that I do about it. They just know that it's a topic that causes contention and fights, and we're just not always up for that. So anyway, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. I am so excited about how resonant this message is for people, and I'm happy to have you guys here, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.
How I yearn for you to understand that the restoration of the priesthood is just as relevant to you as a woman as it is to any man. Because the Melchizedek priesthood has been restored, both covenant-keeping women and men have access to all the spiritual blessings of the church. The heavens are just as open to women who are endowed with God's power, that power flowing from their priesthood covenants, as there are to men who bear the priesthood.